development. Now, as I quickly share housekeeping notes, drop in the comments or chat box where you're joining in from today. We are recording today's session, so if you're interested in a replay, be on the lookout for an email later today. That email is also going to include a survey for feedback, as well as a number of resources that are aligned with today's conversation. We suggest putting your phone on Do Not Disturb, quitting out of your email and messaging apps so you can get the most out of today's discussion, and it's also going to help with your audio and video quality. And we love interaction, so feel free to share your thoughts and comments with us in the chat. Now, to get this show underway, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our first guest coined the term neuroleadership when he co-founded NLI over 2 decades ago. With a professional doctorate, 4 successful books under his name, and a multitude of bylines ranging from the Harvard Business Review to the New York Times and many more. A warm welcome to the co-founder and CEO of the Neuroleadership Institute, Dr. David Rock. Thanks for being here today, David, as always.
Thanks, Shelby. Great to be here. It's a great topic today.
It is. Our next guest for today holds a degree in cognitive neuroscience from Columbia University and multiple certifications. She is Vice President of Consulting and Product at the Neuroleadership Institute, where she works closely with our largest clients at the strategy level to design custom brand-based strategies. Her work has been instrumental to NLI's research on organizational growth mindset, culture, and leadership. A warm welcome to the Vice President of Consulting and Product at the Neuroleadership Institute, Rachel Cardero. Thanks for being here today, Rachel.
Yeah, hi, Shelby, and hi, all. I see so many of our regular viewers in the chat from Belgium, DC. It's a pleasure being here.
It's wonderful. And our moderator for today holds a PhD in neuroscience from New York University. She leads the research team at the Neuroleadership Institute, where she focuses on translating cognitive and social neuroscience into actionable solutions for organizations. A warm welcome to the Senior Director of Research at NLI, Dr. Emma Saro. Thanks for being here today, Emma, and always. And I'm passing it over to you.
Thanks, Shelby. David and Rachel, it's so great to have you both here. We're incredibly lucky to have Rachel with us today. It's going to be a great discussion. So for anyone who's been here the last 2 weeks, we've had great discussions around the design of learning and design and delivery of learning to large events. So we'd love to hear your insights as you remember them, as you've had them over the last couple of weeks. From what we talked about, much of this is anchored on keeping the brain in mind with our AGES model, designing for insight, integrating the social components, and making sure this happened one habit at a time. So last week specifically, we talked about large learning events where we highlighted the focus on the attendee, not on those on the stage, building more of a tasting menu, not building for the sizzler. So for all of you, what came up for you as you listened and over the course of the week? I don't know, for David, what came up for you?
Yeah, while people reflect, I think a week later, it's always interesting to see what still sticks in your brain. And for me, it's like, everyone designs for the stage instead of for the seat. And when you're designing a large event, you want to design for people in the seat, not what's happening on the stage. And it just rings so true to me. And I've been a part of other events even since then. And you really, really see this kind of bias that designers have, instructional designers and sort of, OD people that build these events. They're really obsessed about making everything that happens on the stage as amazing as possible. But what you really want to do is make the experience in the seat as amazing as possible. And just, sitting, watching stuffing on a stage is not an amazing experience in any way. So I think that's the one that really jumps out for me. And for those of you who weren't here week 1 and 2, this is the third in a series. The week 1 was kind of the foundational science of AGES, insight, social learning. And then last week we looked at how it applied to larger events. And this week we're looking at how it applies to kind of the whole system of learning and how you think about learning and sort of how you assess that. And we're going to dig in some really interesting things we've never talked about around how you assess the sort of integrity and coherence and structure and impact of learning, and really get some data about that as well. That's the plan today. But yeah, any other insights from folks on the line from the last 2 sessions?
Yeah. And what are you doing different now, or what do you plan to do different in the coming year? I know we're kind of jumping right into event season, and I know we're planning our own, so we're thinking about these principles too as we design. But as we kind of jump into our own topic today, when was the last time you have actually looked at your own learning programs, really dove in and assessed content and the processes that you have in place for your own learning? And that's what we're doing here today. I know we have a pretty great history of designing these learning audits that we call them, and they've evolved over time, as we all do. So what was that evolution like? When did we start really diving into that and designing these audits?
Yeah, it was around 2010, around when we first published the Aegis model. And like a lot of things we do, we just kind of follow the science, experiment, follow the data, right? And the science emerges, new studies come out. And around 2010, we were able to publish Aegis because of, big body of new research had come out sort of 5 years previous. And so we started like developing a language around learning with the Aegis model and talking about it and presenting it. And companies started to come to us saying, hey, I think we might be doing everything completely wrong. Can you help us kind of understand what's going on? We sort of, it's evolved over 14 years of doing this. But it's so fascinating, the sort of biases that drive the decisions and all this. But one of the earliest projects that's really, really interesting was, a large company, over 100,000 people, very international, lots of very, very well-educated people. And they had something that happens a lot in, particularly in larger companies, which is this sort of, they had a good core program at one point of, and then it got added to, and then added to, and added to, and added to. And it was just a mess now. And just in the DEI space, there were over 20 different training programs that people could take that all kind of huge amount of crossover, no pathway, no coherence, no connections between them, literally 20 disparate programs run by 20 different vendors. With a very big spend as well. And so, we looked at it and we audited that and looked at, what's really working, what's really sticking. And then, so look, we think we can actually do this we think we can do better in 3 programs, in just 3 initiatives that cover everything that you're doing and more, but with a really clear pathway. Like you do this first one, then you do the second one, and will impact 100,000 people, not 5,000 people this way. And it was a transformational project. So that was interesting. Then the other one we did was, I think, really interesting in the same firm. We did something really scary that I recommend you do. Is that we looked at their manager training separate to DEI. We looked at the manager training, and we basically interviewed a lot of people, and we pulled out sort of the central models that were in the training. And we said, how many times a week do you use these ideas? To people who'd gone through a training, earlier, like how many times a week are you using these ideas? And there was basically only 1.5 frameworks or models out of dozens and dozens and dozens of models that was actually in use in the business. And so, literally there were, I don't know how many, we didn't count the number of models, but there was a lot of training, a lot of ideas. And there was only 1.5 ideas that was a fairly consistent, idea that, because we were basically rebuilding a leadership program for them. We said, well, let's see what we should keep that's really working for you. And we literally found 1.5 ideas that they should keep as, in going forward. We were blown away. So this is one of the earliest ones. We see all sorts of things, but it's evolved and sort of in many, many ways. Rachel, for you, how have you seen it evolve? You've been with us a while. How have you seen the sort of learning audit evolve?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think it'll be 11 years in a couple months.
Wow.
Of doing this work, having the pleasure to do this work with so many organizations. One of my favorite projects that we had a couple of years ago, was an organization with over 70,000 employees across the globe, a biotech firm with 50% of their population being on a shop floor, manufacturing floor. And, there was a lot of energy and effort across the business to help the manufacturing population have access to the same resources and learning as those that were sitting in desks. And a really well-meaning L&D team just opened up all the same offerings to those on the plant floor without changing the modalities, without changing how learning happened. And nobody went to any of the learning. It didn't make any sense for them. And so I think definitely when you have Aegis as a North Star, as a compass for what to focus on, it's really easy to take any content and make it good for any audience to give them really that essential insight. And so that like we work with them really carefully to say, what are those main concepts? And then how can you make that digestible for somebody who is in the middle of their shift or might have a different manager on different days? Let's remove these constructs, let's remove the noise and really get into it.
Yeah, we can dig more into that if people have questions later.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of one quick thing, then we should define a learning audit, what we sort of assess so that we know we're all sort of on the same page. But you just reminded me one quick story. It was a big company. It was the head of learning, and he was at a conference. He basically said, as head of learning, I went as an experiment one day and just switched the LMS off. We just turned it off. Everyone had all these programs. And he said, and nothing happened and no one complained. And he turned it off for like quite a while and literally just crickets. And he was like, okay, interesting, right? So I think some of the, learning pathways that are there are sort of, they're clearly not central. People aren't clearly like, really finding value in them. And that's sort of what we want to look at. So yeah, I guess let's define, what we're talking about. So what we're talking about is we have a fantastic team of consultants led by Rachel, and we do all sorts of work. But one of the work we'll do is literally study the way you're doing learning. Now, this can be, just to get clarity, this can be an individual training product. Like it could be a 1 hour, learning experience, or a digital product, or an in-person or a hybrid, any sort. So it could be an individual training experience. It could be a pathway of different experiences into, say, a year-long leadership program, or a whole DEI pathway. Or it could be the entire suite of learning that you have, right? Including soft skills as well as technical skills, right? So it could be, an individual product, it could be a pathway, it could be the whole thing. And sometimes we'll just look at content, and like advise on tangles and, duplications and coherence. Sometimes we'll look at process only, just look at sort of how we're delivering. We're not assessing content. And sometimes we'll look at both, right? Sometimes we'll study like, what are you trying to teach people? What habits are you trying to build? And how do they all fit together? And how are you building it? And that's, of course, the most interesting. But we can look at one product and give you, real feedback on the content or the process, or, all of it. So ultimately the big thing is sort of looking at the entire system at content and process. And the other thing is we're increasingly doing this with partners on their external learning plan. So we have some partners who have digital products or training products, other things, and they want to know about their customer facing training, right? They're doing training for customers, or they sell a product that comes with training, right? So we're increasingly doing that as well. So we're assessing not just a company's internal training program, but their external as well. And there's often a lot of really amazing insights in there. So that's what we're talking about, basically studying what they're doing in learning, either a very focused, granular way or more broadly. Rachel, anything you'd add to that? Did I get that right?
Yeah, and I might just add that I think you mentioned this, but we're seeing a resurgence in the demand for these types of audits. I think, many years ago, we had people pushing the envelope in terms of innovation. How can we be more global? How can we connect with one another? After the pandemic, people definitely were like, oh, how can I make my learning remote, virtual, and still useful? And now we're seeing people like, it's time for a refresh. It's time to like look in the closet and see what's going on. But also balancing these large digital portfolios with people's desire to connect, to have more social learning. And so we're seeing a lot of people have the same questions around, how can I make this good? How can I make this simpler? And how can I make it work? I think.
Yeah. And I think there's been a sort of a few periods of bursts in learning. One obviously when the learning went from all in person to some digital, way back in the 80s and 90s. There was a burst of innovation. And then when the internet got at a good speed, right, suddenly you can have the Netflix of learning with Skillsoft and Harvard Managed Mentor, and you can access digitally. That was a lot of sort of the big burst. When the pandemic happened, everyone had to go virtual, and many companies really, really struggled with it. Well, it turns out we'd been working virtually for 20 years. We'd been delivering learning virtually for 20 years at that point. And we'd put a huge range of different kinds of learning experiences into a virtual environment really effectively. So we had an explosion of interest in in these learning audits, and a huge amount of advising we did on how to do virtual right, just as the pandemic hit. And I think what's happening now is, as Rachel, as you're saying, there's this push to sort of how do we incorporate more in person, but how do we not just over rotate on that, because it can be expensive, doesn't scale, and in many ways doesn't deliver ages. So it's a problem. But there's this push to sort of how do we incorporate that? There's also this push to cut costs, and there's a push to use AI. And there's also this incredible pressure on learning. There's just so much more to learn and in less time. So I think a lot of learning folks are going, oh, look at that. We spend $2 million a year on learning. You know, that's getting to 12,000 people out of 50,000. We're chewing up 1,000, 5,000 people days doing that. There's got to be a better way, right? And we'll look at a number like that and we'll study it. We'll study everything. We'll say, actually, we think we can do that for half the price, and a quarter of the time. And actually better impact. And that's our goal with the learning audit, is looking at how do we reduce cost, reduce time, and increase impact by following the science. And it turns out there are real ways to do that. And so that's our goal. Emma, I guess back to you.
Yeah, no, what's coming up, actually, this just primed me a little bit, is you mentioned the science that we incorporate. And so even though, you know, you would suggest that we should be looking at our learning programs consistently because the environment is constantly evolving. So you mentioned all of these challenges we're facing. That's always going to be the case. There'll be different challenges. We'll have to jump back in and relook at the learning, and how and assess this in different ways. But what are those core research underpinnings that no matter when you look, right, 20 years ago, now in 10 years, they'll still be the case? So what lenses do we look through?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, and then maybe Rachel, you could add on to it. The first one is basically how do you design learning so that it sustains in the brain, so it sticks, so it's used. We have a particular measure for that, which is easy recall under pressure. It's not recall, it's easy recall, and it's not just easy recall, it's easy recall under pressure. And that's a particular measure, very, very measurable, very easy to test informally. You teach people stuff and you say, hey, how often do you use that? What was the idea? How many ideas? We went back to a program, actually. We went back to a program, a company asked us to assess someone else's training. About 50 people had been through a one-day training, and it was getting rave reviews. It was having fantastic net promoter score. And they were like, we want to know whether to spend, millions of dollars putting 1,000 people through it now. It was quite expensive training, but we're just not sure. So we went and assessed it, and we found 25 different models for communication, and like completely different models that didn't, fit together. And it was a beautiful one day, like walk through the park of all the interesting things happening in science around, communication and management, all this. But when we surveyed people a month after the experience, those 50 people, and we got results from more than 30 people of the 50, we said, how many things do you remember? Like, write down what you remember. Nothing. There wasn't even recall. Forget easy recall under pressure. There was just no recall, right? And then we said, how many ideas are you using at least once a week? And there was a couple of people said a couple of things. That was it, out of 50. So Ages helps you like design things, so that you actually get easy recall under pressure later. And so when you design with Ages, you should get, 40 out of the 50 saying, oh yeah, there's multiple things that I'm using every week now. That's kind of a entry point. You can actually get up to like 45 out of 50 or 47 out of 50 in some content areas, like something easier like growth mindset. So easy recall under pressure. So Ages is all about that. We talked about that in the first session a lot more. The second one is designing for insight. We talked about that a bit. So designing for insight, really important for motivation, for activation of ideas. That's a whole set of ideas for how you design for insight. Designing for social learning. We've been talking about that a lot. So how do you design so you're really engaging social memory networks that embeds learning better? And then finally, how do you design for coherence, which is the structural integrity of all the ideas, how they all fit together? So, we've written 2 papers on Ages. We've written 3 papers on insight. We've written widely on social learning. I don't think we have a paper yet, but it's on the way. And we've written widely on coherence and have a paper on coherence. So those are kind of the big ideas. Ages, social learning, insight learning, coherence are kind of the big 4 in a way that you really want to build on. Anything you would add to that, Rachel?
Just like when you say that focus, or when you mention that focus on easily recallable under pressure, I think one of the things that we see most often when we do these learning audits is that one of the things that many organizations miss is not only that it's not easily recallable, definitely not under pressure, but what gets in the way of that is that many times they're just awareness building and they're not focused on actual behavior change. And so it's impossible to get that easily recallable under pressure because they haven't even been given a behavior or an action to take. It's like with those communication classes, you get a lot of emphasis on why communication matters, that you should communicate more, that your people should communicate. But it's kind of like telling somebody, like just be better, be smarter, be fast. Like people actually need to know what to do under pressure. They need that behavior. It can't just be communicate. Like if we knew, we would be doing it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the irony is I forgot one. There's really five, not four. I forgot one, which is the factor model, which is fluency, amount, coherence, and time. And sometimes I think of coherence and the factor model sort of interchangeably. So, but the fact describes it's how to work with limited capacity, limited cognitive capacity. So age is a sort of design principle, insight, social design principles, coherence is the study of the system, and then factors about literally working within capacity limits of the human brain. So there are these five, bits of research that sort of fit together that help you, make these different decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I'll definitely say out of those, I think coherence is my favorite. There are so many organizations as well when we do this work that say like there just are some programs that we have that are boring and like we need to deliver them. There's compliance training, there's other foundational skills that people we need people to do this. Sometimes there are organizations, especially ones that have like a lot of technical experts. We see a lot of pharma companies go through this where like sometimes you just need to know certain things. And what so many organizations miss is any type of bow to wrap around it to build that coherence. And so like I remember working with another like highly technical workforce, large organization who had tons of technical training. And it was a multi-year pathway to help people become, the best scientists that they could be. And it was 2 or 3 years before somebody was able to take a program or have a learning experience that wasn't highly technical. And there were no larger labels, there were no grouping. You're just like kind of going through, how to do this reaction, how to maximize this, how to test for that. It's so simple and so powerful to give things chunks, to give an overarching narrative. Even if you have the same content, even if it's just as technical, there are little things that we can do to really up the impact of your learning and people's feeling about it, like improve instead of feeling overwhelmed, feeling like, oh, well, you know what? There's 4 main things I'm going to master over the next 3 years is so much more manageable than I have 150 credits of technical work to get done in the next 3 years.
Yeah. And it seems a lot of that is leading back to the engagement, right? So you also need to have the motivation and engagement of the individuals going through it. So it's design on the front end and making sure it meets all of these pieces, the social learning, the insights, all of that. But all of that is really geared to engage and motivate the individuals to learn and to come back for more, so that they can make it through all of those credits, whatever it is, because a lot of these.
We talked about this with large events, that there's kind of 3 things you're trying to solve for: attention, insight, and action. You're designing everything ultimately that people really pay close attention, that they have really strong insights, and they really do take action. That's fundamentally what you're solving for, and you can capstone that as engagement for sure. From a sort of cognitive perspective, it's those 3 kind of mechanisms. Let's get a bit more specific, I guess. About kind of what we see when we do these audits, and then maybe what we advise. What are some of the biggest trends you see, Rachel, as you're doing these? See if we can sort of bucket these for people a bit.
Yeah. Well, missteps, maybe I'd call them. So just to kind of call back to what Emma just said about like focusing on engagement. I think that that's absolutely important. And we have specific methodologies from a brain-based perspective on how to get that done. A misstep I see all of the time in organizations is that they actually over rotate to engagement. They try and make learning easy. They try and remove all the discomfort. They try and really focus on that NPS score. Did you like it? Would you recommend it to somebody else, instead of focusing on the behavior change? How can we get you to have a deep insight? How can we get you to act on that insight? And so with many organizations, we actually have to go in and say, like, oh, actually, there's a way to help people manage that discomfort of being called on. There's a way to help them manage the discomfort of sharing with vulnerability and learning from one another. And that's a dance, it's an art, definitely. I think the other thing that I see happen all the time is people take the same amount of content from in one modality, and then they switch modalities and they just deliver it the same way, right? So 5 days in person becomes 5 days on Zoom, where everybody's cameras are off and you're not necessarily taking breaks, and there isn't a social component, but you're asked to like really hold your attention for all that time. That doesn't work. We really have to tap into, what does the learner need? Again, so like that focus back on the seat. How can we tailor the content, the brand, the even the labels of things, to make sure that people are having insights, remembering that learning, and everything isn't just one for one. And then I mentioned this already, but I think another big thing that we help organizations with is with the branding, the actual branding of their learning programs, the learning strategy, helping them organize their coursework or their offerings into things that help people make more sense of them. If you think about reading a textbook and there's no title on the textbook and there's no chapters and there's no headings, learning is more difficult that way. You need those signals to help people understand, what are you doing? Why are you here? And branding can really do so much. Branding can create a threat state. It can create a fixed mindset. And so helping organizations come up with the proper name, the proper groupings, and also use that to communicate their learning strategies to their senior stakeholders so that they can more easily tie them to business outcomes and help the business see the value of, like, please help us get your people into these seats, right? Into these programs. The branding is a huge part of that.
Yeah, I think the well said, the learning function should be best friends with the marketing function.
Yeah.
And be, drawing from them all the time. I think branding's a big piece of it. You just, what I see is it's kind of the total Wild West in learning. Like, it's the absolute Wild West. You can take you can take a program, a training program, and about, let's say, conflict resolution, right? You can take that's currently, say, a 2-day classroom, and there's nothing to say you can't turn that into a 1-hour webinar and get just as good value. There's no measure, there's no, like, it's just the Wild West out there, right? Or even, we're just going to send out a 10-minute e-learning and everyone's going to get it, right? And I think in the absence of good measurement philosophies, and it's just the Wild West. You can do whatever you want, and we see crazy things. I remember one time I was in India, went to see this really big important company, hundreds of thousands of employees, and they proudly showed me their onboarding process. And we walked through, we were in this beautiful learning center, and they showed me there was this sort of it was almost like a record store. You had all these pamphlets of different training courses sort of in the middle of the room, lined up against each other. And they walked, and I was like, oh, what's all this? That's like a lot of content. There was like 40 or 50 different courses. And and all good stuff, all meaningful stuff. And I was like, oh, is this like a 1-year or 2-year experience? Is this sort of everything? They're like, oh no, that's the 2-week onboarding. I'm like, what? They're like, no, people come in 6 days a week, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and they go through 9 a.m., 6 p.m. They get breaks. I'm like, oh, tell me about the break. What do they get? They get 45 minutes for lunch. Any other breaks? Nope. So 6 days a week, 2 weeks, they were going through, to me, what looked like 2 years of classroom work. I was like, how do people survive that? Does anything stick? And so you can do this stuff because there's no universal measure for anything around what's an acceptable, success rate for retention, right? If you have 1,000 people going through a learning experience, what should you be targeting for easy recall under pressure a month later? What's a good number? So there's no real sort of metrics in this. We're slowly trying to evolve this practice and evolve this thinking with some of our measurement philosophies, but it's such a fascinating thing. So I think one thing I see, way too much content, way too quickly, not branded, and a lot of just kind of things got messy. They were clean once and then they got messy. And you've got to be sort of tough as a head of L&D or head of talent or a CHRO. You've got to be kind of tough and be good at saying no. Because the challenge is you've got a lot of people who just sort of want to bring in new things because new things feel great, right? And a lot of new books come out, new ideas and new stuff. And new head of learning comes on board. They want to bring their vendors in and their mark. And what looked sort of coherent and made sense now is just really a mess. And so there's a lot of sort of clean slate work happening. Let's just create a clean slate, And with the tech company I was talking about, it was some years ago now, but we turned about 20 different DEI programs into 3 programs, right? One for every employee, one for managers, and one for folks who wanted some extra work. We didn't call it for diverse employees or underrepresented employees, but it was just for folks who wanted extra support. And so the first one had habits for the whole company, just 3 habits. The second one had 3 habits for all managers. The third one had 3 habits for folks who wanted extra support. And we were able to give people more than they were getting in the 20 different programs in just 3 pathways, and scale that radically cheaper, radically faster. So that's a great example of an outcome that we're sort of advising. Rachel, any other examples you want to dig into, sort of the from to as a result of sort of the assessment and what ended up happening?
Yeah. So when we do these assessments, when we work with organizations, we usually do them in 3 phases. So the first phase of the first step, we spend time getting to know you as an organization, what your goals are for learning. In that second step or phase, we're doing the work, teaching you some of the science as we look through your assets, talk to people, review the data itself. And then in that last phase, we a solution together. You'll get findings, recommendations, illustrations. And for some organizations, we really get in there and we'll build a whole bunch of branding assets. We'll reconfigure your classes for you. Anything and everything, right? So when you brought up onboarding, I just am remembering an organization that we worked with that when in that first phase, they were talking about how they wanted to become a growth mindset organization, and how they wanted to assess all of their learning to see if how well they were doing and how they were either accelerating their growth mindset as an organization or inhibiting it. And all of their solutions to date, right, when they came to us, were about tacking growth mindset on after the fact. Everything was let's just create more and more complexity on the back end. Once you've been here for 4 years, then you take a really complex growth mindset course. And then at 5 years, you take an even more complex one. And one of my favorite solutions in all the time that I've been doing this work is we actually figured out that there was this opportunity in onboarding to give people growth mindset, to teach people growth mindset. And so there is one of the things that we do is helping organizations, like you mentioned, minimize cost, minimize some of the effort, and maximize the impact, even figuring out when to give people, how to order the learning. If you want a growth mindset organization, right? Give it to them day one. Don't wait until they've been in your organization for 5 years and then give them a really heavy course where they have to change their behavior and the habits that they've built over the last 5 years. Even something as simple as that, helping people understand where are those missed opportunities, where are the places where you can eliminate the complexity, and get people when they are most motivated to learn about, what do I need to be successful in this organization? And so that's a favorite story of mine, really just helping people find, the hidden gems, the easy places, the easy wins, really.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love these stories. But I'm sure some individuals that are listening are thinking more in the realm of in-person versus virtual only. So what are you seeing maybe in person that's coming up for organizations, maybe the mistakes they're having or the stories that you have
Yeah,
for
yeah,
assessing
for
those
sure.
programs?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, yeah, let's talk about sort of the common things we see and what we advise around in-person things, and then maybe we can touch on virtual as well. But yeah, with in-person, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting momentum back to in-person, and I think there's some, there's obviously some really good value in being in person. The downside with in-person is trying to do it all in a block, and it's really hard to fight that. But if there's no spacing, the S in ages, you're just not going to get easy recall under pressure. You're barely going to get recall. So a lot of the time it's like, let's split this up into 2 days, 2 half days. The other thing is the afternoon of a learning experience, any day of the week, is just terrible. Like, people just don't learn much, right? So you're really much better to just do 2 or 3 hours in the morning of learning and then let people do their other focus work. Like, really paying attention to new ideas, like you should be at the pace you should go at, is very taxing for more than a few hours. So let's, if you really think there's an 8-hour classroom day, let's do 2 hours week 1, 2 hours week 2, 2 hours week 3, 2 hours week 4. Way better than 8 hours in one day. Way, way, way better. And it might cost more, but you'll get radically better results. Or even if you can't do that, because you're flying people in or something, let's do like the morning day 1, and in the afternoon let people network with each other and do other things, and then let's do the morning day 2, and then let them fly off, right? Just having that like sleep on it effect is really helpful. It gives you a little bit of spacing, a little bit of time to digest, come back, re-embed. Just that is super, super helpful. So, don't do a dinner the night before, do a dinner on the night between, when you definitely will have everyone, right? And do 2 half days. And then you get all this added, networking time. So that's sort of non-obvious, but people fly folks in for a dinner the night before, half the group doesn't make it, and then you do the whole day. It's not the best way to design it. Then the other thing is just, that we talked about this a little bit last week, just the like focus time, like 60, 75, no more than 90 minutes in a block before switching it up, having a short break. You don't want a 3-hour 3-hour block and then a half-hour break. You don't want a 2-hour block and a half-hour break. You want a 75-minute block and a 15-minute break at the most, right? And then another hour block and then a lunch or something like that. So really putting in those short breaks regularly. And in the afternoon, a short break an hour after lunch, and then another short break another hour later, and then another short break, like putting in those breaks to really move around and moving people around as well. So there's a lot of little things like that, sort of managing the flow around in person. And then, room size and, air and all that. Rachel, what do you see with in person? What do we end up advising?
Yeah, it's funny because I think conceptually when we talk about adding breaks, everybody's for it until you're in the process of designing the learning. And it's like, oh, how are we going to fit this? Let's just extend the day by half an hour. And then how are we going to fit this? Well, let's start earlier by half an hour. And we need to fit this in, and let's shorten lunch. And before you know it, like I've seen so many sessions go from being 8 hours with a 1-hour lunch break to all of a sudden 9 hours with a limited lunch break. And so I think that like feeling, and it's safety bias, right? For those that know our SEEDS model, it's risk aversion. It's, if I don't put everything in here, how will they learn? I can't create space. I can't lose this opportunity. I have a captive audience. I need to force feed them all these insights. But it actually works against you. I think it's something I see time and time again. The other thing that I would say with in-person learning is like something we do at NLI is try and leverage different modalities for their strengths. And so, like you said, if you absolutely do need to have people in person, use that for the social connection. Use that to build relevance, to build attention and emotion, the A and the E in ages. And then follow on with more spaced learning where you're doing the exercise, the drills, the skill building. You can play with learning in that way. It doesn't have to be all, kind of have the same tone and pace regardless of the modality.
Yeah, I think there's, I don't like anything that makes learning formulaic, but there's somewhat of a formula that you can follow of sort of how long you can go and kind of what you want to do at the end of a chapter of learning before you start a new chapter. Like you want an integration exercise. It can be 3 minutes, can be 10 minutes, doesn't need to be more. There's a range of different kinds of integration exercises, but look, what we love to do is get people to look over everything that just happened in the last hour and a half, find the strongest insights they had, share them with some other people, then write them down. Like these kinds of things are really, really deepen insight and build those insights. So there's sort of, the brain likes to think in chapters. We finished this topic, we're going to move to another one. Let's put a bow on it, in the brain. So there's a little bit of a formula like that. And then you try to mix things up, and obviously not just have people sitting down. You're trying to get people moving around and standing up and doing activities and, all this kind of thing. So the best learning activities are really challenging ones that you like think are on the edge. Like, I don't know if people are willing to do this. They should feel really challenging. A lot of the learning programs we look at they just feel a little banal, a little bit too easy. We've sort of designed it for not making anyone uncomfortable. But you need to, as Rachel said earlier, you need to make people a little uncomfortable. Just get permission to do so.
Yeah, this reminds me a lot of all of the concepts that we've been bringing up for the last couple of weeks. They apply for this as well, as we're going back and assessing these programs. So what about when you're designing systems or when you're advising on the systems, no matter whether they're virtual or in person? How do you advise on what systems to make sure organizations have in place?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll bring it back to the science, right? Attention, insight, action, right, are the three things that you're trying to solve for: attention, insight, action. So one of the things that we're looking at with any of the solutions is just, we're trying to study impact. If it's our solution, we have hard data on that, right? We know the percentage of the audience that has a habit now. So that's important. So that's a kind of system. But what we're looking at is what do you have in place to make sure that the learning transfers to the work, right? To day-to-day work. What are you doing there? And here you should be using positive social pressure in lots of creative ways. And so we're looking at how aligned is the overall strategy with really embedding the habits into day-to-day skills. And the worst example of that is a one-day training, give people 10 things they're supposed to do, and there's no follow-up. And you just say, go and do these 10 assignments, and you have 5% of people doing anything. The best case example is you take a day experience, you break it into, say, 3. And by the way, we find we can take a day-long classroom and turn it into 3 90-minute sessions and get better results than a day-long classroom in terms of habits. So you less time, much less cost. And you really get better results. So better example is you take a one day, turn it into 3 1.5-hour sessions. You have really specific assignments between that people have to do and have to report out at the start of the next one. Now you're getting 70, 80, 90% of people doing tasks. You just give them 1 or 2 things to do, not a lot, dedicated to that. You put the social pressure on them, reminding them they're going to have to report out. And then, even in the last module, you have something where they've got to report out to an email address or to a person or something. So you're just putting in systems to kind of make sure people are paying attention, they're having insights, they're taking action. And some of those systems are social pressure, some of it's measurement, and some of it's sort of going back and telling the stories of what happened as well. Rachel, what about?
Yeah, and there are some great questions in the chat too that I think would be great to parallel with this discussion for the systems we put in place. Because one of the questions was about Brinkhoff's success case measures, and I feel like that's a really useful methodology after your learning's designed, right? To see okay, how can I show that we've done a good job? A lot of what we end up doing when we're helping organizations is actually, many times we're on the front end of that process, actually saying, okay, like David mentioned, how do we take this day in person and translate it to something virtual? And in that case, we don't want to experiment and wait till the end to kind of find that success case. We can use science as the source code, as the shortcut, as the secret ingredient. We can use that as the checklist to help us make that conversion. And one of the things I think we in terms of systems or operationalized processes, that I think if I'd had to name my favorite, I love using measurement as a strategy for metacognition and sustainment. Where we not only help people with the learning itself, but we actually look at what are your measurement strategies? And then is it positioned to actually not only give you data and help learners and participants? Or is the timing off or the questions off? And so you can almost do yourself a favor as you collect data. And those data, they're extremely important, but like that's something systemic, so easy to operationalize if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, so let's dive into that and talk about how we measure, because we have a really well-designed measurement strategy. We're measuring for habits and how often individuals are engaging in behaviors, which is what we want, right? As opposed to whether they have awareness, as you were mentioning before, Rachel.
Yeah, do you want to take this one, Rach?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple things, and a lot of this work, if not all of this work, comes from Emma's wonderful team, our research team, really helping us hone in on, what those research insights are for creating habit formation and behavior change. But we really focus on the actual frequency of new behaviors. So we talk about BCP a lot at work at NLI, behavior change percentage. And that's our ultimate goal. We're a little obsessed, I would say, with new habits and helping people form those habits and keep those habits. But at the end of any learning experience, we want to know, how often are you putting this new behavior into practice? What percentage of learners are actually using the behaviors that you taught? How are we helping people change their behavior, not just gain awareness of, communication we brought up earlier. Like, yeah, I know communication is a thing, but we want learners to walk away knowing, what do I need to do? And so measuring how often are you doing that thing is really the best barometer for knowing if you've been successful in teaching them the right way. And Emma or David, anything you'd add there?
Yeah, only that we can also pull apart that BCP measure and look a little deeper now, and we're starting to do this in if there isn't a change, why is that? So is it that there wasn't enough positive social pressure, or, there wasn't that role modeling of others that they were seeing in the organization? So why change? Or did they not know how? So we're able to dive in and actually provide a bit more guidance on now, okay, so you didn't get the result you really wanted. So let's look and see, like, under the hood, why this is happening. And then we can fix that one piece. So there's so much more than just one number. It gives you kind of a starting point, and then you can kind of fix the problem.
Yeah, the BCP, I mean, we could talk for hours about BCP, behavior change percentage. It's been such a useful construct for us. I mean, it's not perfect. Nothing is with measurement. It's a hard thing to do, but it feels and looks really valid because we get, really consistent measures across programs, different measures between facilitators and between products, different, like it has this real sense of validity in it, even though it's not, no measurement's perfect. But being able to go back 2 to 4 weeks after a program and say, how many times a week are you applying this habit now? And then also asking direct reports that question, how many times is your boss applying that? I think it's a really, really helpful metric that you can keep constant and then do things. And then here's something you can now take to the bank, because now you can like put 100 people through an in-person training, check the BCP, look at the cost per person. 100 people through a series of hives, 3 90-minute sessions with us, look at the BCP, look at the cost per person. Now do the same with completely digital. Look at the cost, look at the BCP, and you can put all that into a spreadsheet, and you can say, look at that. You can actually look at a cost per habit. There's some pretty basic math in that. You can say, how much does it cost for every habit? And it turns out you'll look at this and you go, oh, wow, actually the virtual programs are drastically cheaper per habit than the in-person. It's not that complicated to work it out. So cost per habit can be worked out. And now you have a measure. Now you can say, hey, facilitator, I need you to hit this standard. If you're not hitting this standard, there's something wrong, because this is the number of habits we normally see from this program in this way. So we're starting to build we're starting to build a real like school of thought around measuring with accountability and measuring with integrity around these things. And I think that's, we got a lot of work to do, in the space, but we'll present more on this at the summit, kind of what's possible with this and how we're seeing it. But we should be moving towards a world where it isn't the Wild West. Like if you don't get 50% of your target audience doing something a month later with the habit, the program should be shut down or the facilitator shut down or completely redesigned. Like you can absolutely get that. And if you're not getting that, and if you're not getting, 60, 70, 80% from an extended virtual program, something's really wrong. So I think we're getting to a place where there's less of a Wild West. I think in the next year, we'll probably put out some standards like this. We'll challenge ourselves, cause a whole lot of ruckus, I'm sure, but we'll challenge ourselves to put some standards out like this and say, look, this is what you're trying to get to. So we're starting to have, this possibility of a kind of dashboard of a learning where there's some real accountability in the process and being able to study the whole learning strategy, using this data as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that we're designing some events in the future to go into that specifically, right? The how-to, right? When you're facilitating, designing events, in person, virtual, large events, it'll give you all of the how-to with this.
Yeah, there's been so much interest in this. We've decided to launch something we've never done before and kind of open up behind the scenes a bit. And we're running an in-person workshop, which now you're going to say that goes against everything you've said, but we're going to run an in-person workshop for instructional designers, facilitators, talent folks. It is for internal people. We're not doing it for external consultants at the moment, but we're doing brain-based design and facilitation. We're also launching a virtual version of that, which will be 3 1.5-hour sessions. That'll be starting early in the new year. If you're interested in the virtual version of that, just put virtual design and your company name in the chat. Someone will reach out to you. Just put virtual design, company name, and we're going to have in January, maybe February, we'll have a launch of a virtual version of this. But we're running this in New York and also in London coming up in November. An in-person workshop is where lots of people wanted to get together and have that experience. So that's happening. I think that's probably everything we wanted to cover today. Rachel, what's your biggest insight as we wrap this up?
Oh, I'll bring it back to the beginning. Design for the person in the seat and not the stage. Even if the stage is small, even if it's the front of the classroom, design for the person in the seat.
Yeah, it's really big one. Yeah, I think my insight is the one that's just sort of evolving is that we might be able to lead the charge away from the Wild West into learning strategies that have real integrity and accountability, right? The real metrics of what you're supposed to achieve in these different kind of learning modalities and cost per habit as a measure. So I think there's some exciting things that we can do in that space in the next year or two. And otherwise, thanks so much for the conversation, Rachel and Emma. Very important question. If you're interested in a learning audit, put the word learning audit and your company name in the chat. I always forget that kind of thing.
What we've been talking about.
Right. Put the word learning audit, and we're doing one-off sessions at times, complimentary, just to kind of look at what you're doing and give you some guidance, and then from there we'll know if there's value we can add to really dig in and do proper projects. But we're happy for our partner clients and potential partners to come in and just do a review with you as well off the clock. So put learning audit or just audit and your company name, and we'll make sure someone reaches out to you. So thanks for a great conversation, Rachel. Emma, thanks everyone for being here, and look forward to seeing some of you at the summit. We're 6 weeks away, October 29 and 30. It's going to be an amazing session. We're in the final throes of the research and pulling it together. We're super psyched. So maybe my team can put the link to the summit in the chat so we can get some people there. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Back to Shelby.
Thanks, Emma, David, and Rachel for today's discussion. We really appreciate you as always. We already shared the poll, but just to reiterate, Summit is on the way, October 29th and 30th. So make sure you check that out. Visit summit.neuroleadership.com for all of your needs. If you enjoyed this conversation, we also have our podcast, Your Brain at Work. So listen wherever you subscribe. And on behalf of our team behind the scenes, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you each week, and we will see you next week. Have a great weekend.